Good afternoon. You're joining myself, Mr. Ish, for this video, continuing with this trend of videos with the hopes of helping you all prepare for exams and tests. We're talking here today about coin toss, and you know when you're talking about coin toss, we're either talking about probabilities or odds. We know a coin is going to have either a heads on one side or a tails on the other side. And at any given instance, the probability of heads is always equal to a probability of tails, which is always equal to 1 over 2. Keeping that in mind, let's look at some good questions. As is always the case, we're looking at two questions, but a question can have several parts. The first question over here has three parts. The first question says, find the probability of head or tails. And you know, I've said this before, when you're seeing or, you're thinking or translating into a plus in terms of probability. When you see and, it translates into a multiplying. So we'll look at each of these parts sequentially. For the very first one, we're talking about probability of heads or tails. What's the probability of heads? It's going to be 1 over 2. And then you see that or sign. And what's the probability of tail? It's 1 over 2, the same. And when you add these up, you get 1. So the probability of getting a head or a tail, and when you're seeing this, you're thinking about a single coin toss, is going to be 100%, because in that single coin toss, you will either get a head or tail. There's no third option. So 100% of the times in that single coin toss, you will either get a head or tail. Now this next one, probability of head and tails, indicates there are going to be two coin tosses. What's the probability of getting a head? It's a 1 over 2. And what's the probability of getting a tail? It's 1 over 2. You gotta multiply these and you get a 1 over 4. So the probability of getting a head and a tail is like you saying on a single coin toss, the first one should be a heads and on the second one it'll be a tail. Well, then the probability of that is a 1 over 4, and that should be a good answer. Part C says, what's the probability of not getting this head and tail? You know the probability of not getting something is equal to 1 minus the probability of getting it. Therefore, you look back at the answer for B, you do 1 minus 1 over 4, and your answer is going to be 3 over 4. And that's a pretty high probability. There's 3 out of 4 chance, or 75% of the time, that you will not get a head and a tail on two successive coin tosses where the first is a head and the second is tail. So this answer over here should be right as well. Alright, let's look at the second question again with three parts. The first one says, what's the probability of getting 3 H's? What does that mean? That means you're talking about 3 coin tosses, and each of the coin tosses you should be getting a heads. And you know the probability of getting each head is a 1 over 2. And again, you're looking at times 1 over 2 times 1 over 2. So you're looking at 1 over 8. Or you could have just thought of this as 1 over 2 to the power of 3, because there are 3 coin tosses. And in each instance, you're seeing the probability of getting a head. You can read this as probability of head on toss number 1 and probability of head on toss number 2 and a probability of head on the toss number 3, in which case you're multiplying 1 over 2 3 times and your answer 1 over 8 should be good. How about number B? It's no different than the first question. In either case, the tails probability is always 1 over 2 and the heads probability is always 1 over 2. It doesn't matter what you really had in here. You're looking at 4 coin tosses, and specifically you want a T, H, T, T. You can just do 1 over 2 to the power of 4 and your answer will be 1 over 16. So the probability of getting a tails, heads, tails, tails on 4 coin tosses in this order will be 1 out of 16. Now the last question is, what's the probability of not? This prime over here means not. Of getting heads, 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 and heads. That's 5 coin tosses in which you got heads successively 5 times. Consecutive throws in which you got heads in every time. How can you look at this? You can look at this as probability is equal to here of not getting it is 1 minus probability of getting it. Alright, what's the probability of getting 5 heads? That would be 1 over 2 to the power of 5. But we have to answer the question, which is this right there. So that would be 1 minus 1 over 2 to the power of 5, which would be 1 minus 1 over 32. And you can say that would be 31 over 32. And that right there would be your answer to this question. So let's put this down over here. It'll be 31 over 32. So the probability of not getting these 5 heads is pretty high. But the probability of getting these 5 heads is pretty low, because that's 1 over 32. And that right there is the end of this video. Coin toss probability. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.